Welcome back to the Pre-Match Pint, a sports show brought to you by Luke James, Dan Lockwood and Callum Ison. On today's show, we're going to be sticking to English football, discussing the final game week of the Premier League season, the Championship playoffs, and the upcoming FA Cup final, although I suspect we will drift into a number of tangents along the way. Before we get into today's episode, please do follow us on Twitter. You can find us via the handle at Pre-Match Pint Pod on Twitter. And on that note, we begin the podcast. I'll start by introducing you to Callum. What has caught your attention over the past 7 days?
Hey, first of all, I just want to give a quick shout out to the FWA who somehow managed to share our graphic on Twitter for Jordan Henderson winning the FWA Player of the Year among the likes of Gary Lineker and James Pearce from The Athletic and Sky. So, I mean, that was a big bonus for us this week. And then, what's caught my eye this week? I guess it's just been football and a lot of the transfers. Obviously, the transfer window opened this week and the transfer rumours have already started flying in. And you've obviously got Sancho going to Man United, Kai Havertz going to Chelsea. You've just got loads of big transfers. So, I love transfer seasons. That's something that's definitely caught my eye.
For sure, and I think the transfer window kicking off is going to be so interesting as well. And if you kind of look at kind of the post or kind of ongoing COVID-19 kind of footballing economy, that's something that's going to be so interesting as the summer progresses. Dan, kind of what has caught your eye over the past week?
What's caught my attention is definitely sort of Brentford's performance in the playoff. I mean, they're a team that I do like, and I think they play really good football. So it's nice to see them progress onto the playoff final. That's sort of, especially last night, their performance was quality. Didn't really put a foot wrong apart from sort of Pontus Jansson right at the end, nearly throwing it away. But it's a pretty good game. So that's sort of caught my eye this week.
One of the things that I kind of came across on social media was after the first game, which Swansea won, was it 1-0? I think the first leg.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
There's a video of Thomas Frank, the Brentford manager, talking to kind of Brentford's media officer by the side of the pitch. And Frank is very, very self-assured and he's very, very much like, we are the better team. We are definitely going to beat them in the return leg. And he had absolutely no doubt in his mind. He basically said, we are the better team. We played the best of football. We got unlucky, of course, with the red card that was kind of since been overturned. And the only reason I saw it was because people were retweeting it after kind of the second leg, where this Swansea fan had tweeted, this is all the motivation our players need. Look at what the Brentford manager has said about our team, kind of how we're not as good as them. So arrogant, this, that, and the other. And then obviously they get turned over 3-1 in the second leg. So that was something that I found kind of quite amusing this week. The thing I was going to point out at the start of the show, kind of away from the football, there's two things actually. Of course, it's the British Grand Prix this weekend, the first of kind of two back-to-back races at Silverstone that will be really, really interesting for both kind of reasons. On the track and off the track, of course, Formula One's anti-racism protests have been maligned by disunity and just disorganisation. So hopefully this weekend they can actually kind of get it right. And of course, Lewis Hamilton has, of course, been leading the charge on that one. The second thing I wanted to talk about briefly is the fact that the NHL playoffs, or rather the NHL play-in round, starts kind of, I believe, on Monday or actually on Saturday, I think, which will be really exciting because it's kind of the first time that ice hockey has returned since the pandemic, and there's a few games to watch on Free Sports if you're interested. However, I feel that probably wraps up kind of our opening what has caught your attention over the past 7 days segment. In terms of the final weekend of the Premier League season, what stood out to you? Of course, it was a day of drama at both ends of the table. Manchester United and Chelsea secured a space in the Champions League. And then, of course, at the other end of the table, Bournemouth and Watford were relegated with Norwich City. So, again, I'll go to Dan. What kind of stood out for you?
I mean, given the final table, I was sort of quite surprised to see Bournemouth go down. I mean, I know they haven't had the best of seasons, but they are a team that I think has a bit about them, and they've got a good lot of quality players. I was sort of expecting Villa to be the ones to go down. Obviously, they ended up beating Arsenal the other week, which definitely helped them. But I mean, you've only got to look at sort of Bournemouth's performance on the final day. I think it was 3-1 against Everton. That's a good result for them, and I do feel like they're too good for the Championship, but not quite good enough to survive sort of in the Premier League. That was sort of the shocker for my end. Sort of Champions League spaces went to where I expected them to really go, given the fixtures on the last day.
For sure. Callum, what did you make of the final day of the season?
Tell you what, something I found really interesting. I watched a game with quite a few Man United fans. A lot of my friends are United fans. So they clearly obviously wanted United to beat Leicester on the final day. But I was just shocked by the lack of quality that a top four side really has. I think Man United have been good recently, but if you watched them against Leicester, they just lacked anything. And it was purely to the fact that I think Leicester nullified Bruno Fernandes, like just immediately didn't allow him to get on the ball. And anytime he got on the ball, then you could see an immediate difference to United. So I think if you just kind of look back at past seasons as well, I think last season, obviously Chelsea finished third on like 70 something points, where like if you compare that to this season, it's majorly lower. So I just think that the quality like the gap in quality between third and second has got massive, and I hope next season that kind of is bridged a little bit.
On that note as well, if you look at the final Premier League standings, of course, Liverpool won the title with 99 points. The kind of frustrates me slightly that they didn't get to the 100, but there you go. Manchester City second on 81 points. Then behind them, of course, you've got Manchester United on 66, 15 goals ahead of Chelsea, also on 66 points. Then with Leicester City in fifth on 62 points, Tottenham Hotspur on 59 points in sixth, Wolverhampton Wanderers in seventh, 59 points again, Arsenal in eighth with 56 points. And then joint on 54 points in 9th and 10th, respectively, you have Sheffield United and Burnley. What I would say kind of the thing that has really stood out for me recently is the fact that Leicester City have capitulated at such a rate, especially since the restart. There was a graphic that The Athletic shared that showed, I think, the league table had the season started kind of post-lockdown, and Leicester City, I think, were fourth bottom. And the other thing that kind of stood out to me as well, that West Ham were, I think, 10th or something like that. And yeah, it really does kind of show Leicester had so much kind of momentum going into the final stretch, and they've just thrown it away in such a spectacular way. And again, you look at some of the mistakes that their experienced players made, and again, it didn't matter at that point anyway, but the second Manchester United goal, where Kasper Schmeichel was just giving it to Jesse Lingard on a plate, was criminal for a player of his quality. And it just kind of, it looks like Leicester ran out of road, which is shocking for a team that has, over the past couple of years, kind of been defined by the fact that they are a team that can kind of hold on and battle with the teams at the top of the table.
I just kind of want to challenge your point that obviously you think you're saying Leicester have collapsed since the return of the Premier League. And obviously that is true. But I think their collapse has actually been far bigger than that, actually. I think I saw something that since then they beat Southampton 9-0. Southampton have taken 45 points. And I think Leicester took 42 or something, or maybe even less. But they took like far fewer points after that position. Since Boxing Day, they've basically just capitulated, really. And I think a lot of Liverpool fans, and I actually think some Celtic fans would have actually told you that they could have seen that coming with Brendan Rodgers. I think I don't mind Brendan Rodgers. I think he's a good manager, but he's one of these people that I think kind of gets stuck in his own ego a little bit. I think as soon as he started to get linked to jobs at like Arsenal, I think he kind of started to think he was better than he was. And I think sometimes he lets complacency get the better of him.
How much of an impact as well has it had on Leicester that Jamie Vardy, since kind of Christmas time, has just not been the same player as he was in the first half of the season? Of course, you can't take it away from Vardy. He was the league's top scorer and he thoroughly deserved the award. But in the second half of the season, in games that really mattered for Leicester, was he one of the players that was guilty of kind of not delivering when they needed it the most?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean, we saw how good Vardy was sort of at the beginning of the season. And I mean, as you said, you can't take it away from him, as he did win the Golden Boot. But his performances recently, they haven't lived up to sort of what we've grown to expect from Jamie Vardy, especially at Leicester. I feel like he's sort of a player that has carried him into that position, and it's also sort of his poor performances that have also not allowed them to push on and keep in the top four. But I mean, he's by far one of their best players, and you have to look to sort of other places on the pitch as to where they have lost it. Not just Vardy, given sort of he put them in a position in the first place. but yeah, he definitely went sort of a bit downhill since Christmas, and especially since the restart. He's been nowhere near as good as we expect.
I think Jamie Vardy is actually a really interesting player to look at, because a lot of the talk was about Jamie Vardy was kind of being hindered by the fact that he was so close to becoming a centurion in like the Premier League. He was obviously, I think, 1 goal off 100 goals in the Premier League for quite some time. But as soon as he scored that, he seemed to be a complete different player. He seemed to kind of just relax. And I think he scored 4 goals in 3 games or something after completing that. So I don't know. It's someone to look at to see if he kind of was affected by that. But I think it's kind of harsh anyway to kind of pin the downfall of Leicester on Jamie Vardy too much, because obviously, what is he now, 32, I believe, or something? And to rely, 33, to rely on a player of that age to be your key talisman is kind of a bit worrying for the future of Leicester.
What I would say as well is you look at kind of Vardy's so-called decline this season, and it comes after the spell where like his wife had another baby at kind of the turn of the year, which was when he was at kind of top form in December, and then he missed, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks of football because obviously he was kind of away on paternity leave. He came back and he's not quite been the same player until kind of he's picked up a couple more goals recently. And again, in the middle of that, you've got kind of a global pandemic to contend with as well. So I think I do agree it's harsh to pin it on Jamie Vardy, but of course it's a big loss for Leicester City, and you talk about the missing out on the Champions League places. Do you think finishing 5th will see the likes of kind of James Maddison, Ben Chilwell move away from the club?
Personally, no, because I think James Maddison is actually close to signing a new 4-year contract. And I think that's partly down to Manchester United and the teams. I think Arsenal were linked with them, and Arsenal obviously don't have the money now. But like Manchester United have turned themselves to like bigger targets. Obviously, we spoke about Sancho at the start of the show. So I think Maddison will stay, and I think Maddison's good. But I think the problem with viewing Leicester as if they are a top 4 side at the start of the season, I will happily say I predicted they'd get top 4, but that was just because of the quality of the other sides wasn't as good. But I think if you'd have said at the start of last season to any Leicester fan, you'll finish 5th and you'll go into the Europa League for the first time ever, I think they would have taken that. So I think a lot of the players will actually think, well, we've actually achieved what we set out for, even though obviously we're on to get top 4. I think it'll be a bit harsh to maybe look at themselves and go, oh no, we didn't achieve what we wanted, so we need to move on. Because I actually think that club's going places, and I think if they keep them players, I think they'll actually achieve top 4 next season.
100%, I agree. And I think that's the thing when you get into these situations where, of course, Leicester, for much of the season, were in 3rd position and looked quite comfortable for a lot of the season, kind of just in the top 4. Didn't really seem that there are kind of a major risk of dropping out. And then, to his credit, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, do you think he's done a good job, kind of especially since the turn of the year, or do you think, again, it's just another kind of false dawn for Manchester United? Of course, they beat Leicester to secure the place. In fact, secure 3rd place in the Premier League this year.
The thing is, it's difficult at the minute, especially with Man United, because if you look, and there's a team in 3rd that's won 18 games. I mean, how often do you see that? I mean, obviously, we can't speak as Arsenal and West Ham fans of the quality of their side. I mean, they are a good side, but is it a side that's going to carry on pushing on? I don't think it is.
That's an interesting point, and what I would say to that is, and again, my criticism of West Ham, kind of both under Manuel Pellegrini and David Moyes, is well documented. But if you look at West Ham, they also won 10 matches. And you look at Manchester United, they finished 3rd and they only won 18 matches. Of course, that's a big difference kind of over the course of a season. But it shows the huge golfing quality between the top 2 and kind of the teams below that. And again, kind of West Ham definitely aren't in that conversation. But the fact of the matter is, Manchester United drew 12 matches this year. That is just far too many, kind of, if you are ever going to win silverware. And again, it'll be interesting to see how they do in the Europa League. I believe they're playing a 2nd leg game against Lask, and then it's kind of into the later rounds of the competition. The other team, of course, the main benefactors on the final day of the season was Chelsea. They did beat Wolverhampton Wanderers. Has Frank Lampard done a good job this season?
I think he has. I think he's being unfairly kind of commented on by some fans and some pundits, just because Chelsea obviously are known to be a top 4 club and a team that has won the Premier League so many times in the past 10, 20 years. But I think they lost one of the Chelsea's best ever players in Eden Hazard. And I mean, even though Christian Pulisic, I mean, came in, didn't start the season very well, but finished really, really strongly. He was actually probably one of Chelsea's standout players. To replace a player of that quality with no signings and fleshing through really good youngsters, like Mason Mount had an incredible season, no matter what you think about him. It's his debut season in the Premier League, and I don't think anyone would have predicted he'd have done that well. Tammy Abraham obviously tailed off in the second half of the season, but still notched 15 goals. I mean, what Frank Lampard, I think, has done is create a new mentality at Chelsea. And I think I actually respect Chelsea more as a club now that they're fleshing through some youth. And obviously they are spending quite a bit of money at the moment, but it seems to be on younger players rather than established talents. I think the change in dynamic at Chelsea is something that Frank Lampard should be proud of.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really say that Frank Lampard hasn't done a good job. I mean, he's secured top 4. Has he progressed Chelsea? Probably not. But given the circumstance, obviously with the transfer ban, losing Hazard, it was always going to be difficult for him. And I mean, they're in the FA Cup final as well. I mean, it's not a bad season by any account. It's just whether he has made them better, and I'm not sure whether he has. But it does look like he's heading that way, especially as he's sort of integrating the youth players, something that we've not seen a lot of from Chelsea in recent years.
The interesting thing with Chelsea as well is kind of they scored, I think, the 3rd highest number of goals in the Premier League. I was going to say the top half. I'm going to assume the whole of the Premier League. But if you look at they scored 69 goals this season. If you look at the number of goals they conceded 54 goals, which, with exception to no one, they conceded the most number of goals in the top 10, which is just ridiculous kind of for a team of Chelsea's quality. And again, the major kind of bump in the road that Chelsea have had this season is, of course, the form of the much maligned goalkeeper Kepa Arrizabalaga. He has been pummeled with abuse on social media. It's not been a good season for what was a record-breaking transfer fee for a goalkeeper. Is he someone that Chelsea need to sell over the summer? Who should they replace him with, Callum?
Yeah, I do think they need to get rid of him. I mean, the problem with a goalkeeper is even if they have the quality, it's kind of the same with De Gea. As soon as their confidence is shot, because everybody focuses on them for the mistakes they make, they're going to find it even harder to get back to the form that they once were in. So I think the best thing Kepa could do is move back to somewhere, probably in Spain. And because I think going home for him, I think it will boost his confidence once again. I actually think he'll do much better over there. But the problem is, obviously, yeah, he is a world record fee for a goalkeeper. So if they're looking to recoup that money, they're not going to be able to sell him. So they're going to have to find a way of structuring a deal. And the problem with Chelsea, obviously, at the moment is they've gone out and bought Timo Werner. It looks very likely that they're going to sign Kai Havertz. They've signed Hakim Ziyech. So they're buying all these attacking players without actually fixing what they need to fix. So if they want to get a goalkeeper, they probably need to sell Kepa now. But are they going to be able to sell Kepa? I'm not sure.
I think if Kepa is sold, it will definitely be at loss regardless of where he goes, just because of the nature of kind of how far his stock has fallen. The two names that Chelsea have been linked with in recent days are Onana from Ajax and Jan Oblak, of course, at Atletico Madrid. Dan, of the two, of course, Oblak would be much more expensive. And they're talking about, I think, 30 million euros for Onana. Of the two of those choices, who would you back to be the next Chelsea goalkeeper if you were in charge?
I mean, the thing is with the two choices, Oblak he's obviously the better keeper at the moment. But you've got to look at Onana. He's a good few years younger and will come with a lower transfer fee than Oblak. Oblak will be very expensive, just given how good he is and how essential he is to that Atletico Madrid team. But if I was to pick one of them to solve Chelsea's problems, I mean, I think it's got to be Oblak. I think he'll come in straight away and he will sort of sort out that back line, and I think they'll feel a lot more confident with Oblak back there. rather than sort of Onana, who hasn't really proved himself in a top league, given that he's only played in Holland. So yeah, if I was Chelsea, I think I'd stamp up the money and go with Oblak.
That's the thing as well, of course. Oblak, in my opinion, and if you look at his clean sheet record at Atletico Madrid, is probably the best goalkeeper in the world. And you just think, for Chelsea, is it worth the investment? Because Chelsea are a team that play on the front foot. They're not a team that invite lots of pressure in the same way that Atletico Madrid do. And I was listening to a podcast earlier. It was about the NHL. It was about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And basically, Toronto have a $5 million goalkeeper in Frederick Anderson, who hasn't been very good for them in the NHL recently. He's been pretty bad, in all honesty. He's been pretty average. And of course, it's different with the salary cap, but in terms of how much money Chelsea can spend, they've kind of got a virtual salary cap anyway. And you just think, would Chelsea be better served with a cheaper goalkeeper, and then they can invest more money and add in another kind of figure to the central midfield or defence or that kind of idea, and then just settle for kind of your second choice in Onana? And I think that's something that Chelsea will need to consider because of the very nature of the league. And you look at like Manchester City and Liverpool, they've got quality for outside. So is it a choice of prioritising perhaps your outfield players over your goalkeeper?
For me, I don't think that's true. I just think you need to look at Liverpool for the example, really. Liverpool tried out a pretty unknown keeper, really, in Loris Karius. And as much as Kepa Arrizabalaga cost, he was really untested at that level. Like, he was a good keeper, but he wasn't. I don't think like many people knew him before that price tag came about. Whereas I think Oblak obviously is the best keeper in the world, and I think if you buy a goalkeeper, you can see with the effect Alisson's had at Liverpool. If you buy a great goalkeeper that's known to be great, they can instantly change your team. And you could see the confidence in that Chelsea team is completely shot with Kepa now. I think against Liverpool, there was a video of 4 of the Chelsea players turning around and screaming at him because he didn't come to collect the ball. And as soon as your defence lose confidence in that, they don't want to play the ball back. So they're actually risking playing forward passes that could get intercepted and then you're put on the back foot. Whereas you saw the difference between when Liverpool had Mignolet and Karius to when we have Alisson. I don't think I've ever sat watching a Liverpool game recently and thought, oh my God, this is going in, because Alisson just instills confidence in you. So I do think that the goalkeeper is probably more necessary than getting a centre mid or a centre back.
There's a class below kind of your world-class goalkeepers though, aren't they? You've got the likes of Ederson, Alisson, Oblak, etc. And then you've got the group of goalkeepers beneath them. And what I'm saying about Chelsea is they fought in spending, I think, 71, 72 million on Kepa. They thought they were getting that next level goalkeeper, and it's clearly not worked out that way. Should they... And again, I think my views on Joe Hart are quite well known, dating back to the time when he was kind of Manchester City's #1 goalkeeper. I've never been a fan of Joe Hart. I don't particularly rate Joe Hart, and I'm not really that surprised by the position that he now finds himself in. But of course, Joe Hart was an integral part of the Manchester City team that won a number of trophies kind of earlier on, kind of in the kind of moneyed Manchester City world. What I'm saying is, could Chelsea go for Onana, the younger of the 2 goalkeepers, and say, okay, with this guy, we're set up for the next number of years and hopefully we can develop him? Because the situation you have with Kepa is they brought in a £70 million goalkeeper who they were never going to make a profit on. There is no way at this kind of moment in time that you're going to buy a goalkeeper for £70 million and the price continue to inflate. It felt like it had kind of reached a ceiling at that point, especially for someone who, as you say, hadn't been tested in the Champions League. There was always going to be a risk with that kind of thing. A question that I'll put to you, of course, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United and Chelsea finished in the top 4 this year, which meant the likes of Tottenham, Wolves, Leicester and Arsenal missed out. Are any of the 4 teams that qualify for the Champions League this year going to drop out of the top 4 next season?
I think Chelsea massively depends on if they sort out their defensive issues. If they sign some quality at the back, I think they'll be safe in the top 4. But I think going another season shipping that many goals, even if you have the strike power that they're going to have next season, I don't think it's going to be enough, especially given that it'll be Mikel Arteta's first full season at Arsenal, Jose Mourinho's first full season at Tottenham. And I think other teams are going to strengthen, maybe bar Liverpool. I think the rest, and maybe Arsenal, they're going to strengthen. And Man United is an interesting one. I actually think Man United will do quite well next season. I actually do think they're going to probably end up signing Jadon Sancho. And I think being able to rotate Bruno Fernandes is going to be really key to them next season. Obviously, Fernandes has come in and pretty much played every single minute since signing him. And they can't do that for a full season. So if they can get someone coming in that they can rotate with him with the quality of Bruno Fernandes, I think they'll be safely in top four next season.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with United and Chelsea, I've not really been overly impressed with them much this season. I don't think they're an amazing side. I do think their sort of fate in the top four does depend on whether the teams around them, like the Arsenal, Tottenham, Leicester, whether they do strengthen. And I think that's going to be more of the problem for them rather than strengthening themselves. I do sort of think that finishing third and fourth they might sort of stagnate, maybe not invest as much, especially Man United. If they don't get Sancho, where are they going to look to? There's not really too many options that could improve that side massively to the point where they are sort of at Man City and Liverpool's quality. So I think it's going to be more of a test of how the teams around them do their business rather than the Man United and Chelsea themselves.
Sure, and kind of if you look at the results on the final day of the season, Arsenal beat Watford 3-2. Burnley lost to Brighton and Hove Albion 2-1. Chelsea, of course, won 2-0 against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Crystal Palace won. Tottenham Hotspur won. Then, of course, Bournemouth, despite winning, were relegated. They had a 3-1 win over Everton. United, we've spoken about the victory against Leicester. A 5-0 win for Manchester City over Norwich City. Liverpool, of course, finished the season on a high with a 3-1 win over Newcastle United at St James's Park. The final two results of the season, Southampton 3, Sheffield United 1, and West Ham United 1, Aston Villa 1. And that brings us nicely, I feel, onto the relegation battle. Of course, Bournemouth and Watford were relegated this year. What did you make of the battle to stay in the Premier League in the final week of the season?
It was definitely an interesting one. I mean, it was sort of, it would have been made more interesting had West Ham been involved, especially just for, I think a lot of people were looking to that final day and seeing West Ham against Villa and sort of hoping that was going to be sort of one of the games of the season, sort of for survival. But I mean, as obviously West Ham sort of picked up their form a bit towards the end, I didn't really expect Bournemouth to go down. I did expect West Ham to beat Villa. I do think Bournemouth are probably the better side at the moment compared to Villa. But also, I'm not sure. I do think the right teams have gone down. I mean, it would be a shame to see sort of some of the talent that Villa have, and given spending so much money, I think that would have been so damaging to the club. So I do think the right teams have gone down in the end. But it would have made for a much better finish had West Ham been involved. That final game of the year, it just would have been incredible, especially scrolling through Luke's Twitter all day as the scores were coming in. That would have been incredible, especially if West Ham had ended up going down. I think we would have been having a lot different conversation today. But no, it was a good end to a decent season.
What I would say about, I feel like we should do West Ham now is, regardless of the fact that West Ham stayed in the division, it's still a horrible season for everyone involved. And you look at the legacy of kind of the Manuel Pellegrini era, where we invested in the likes of Pablo Fornals, for example. It's just such a crying shame that West Ham were reduced to this side that had to play this kind of hard-working football under David Moyes, because undoubtedly West Ham had the quality to do more than that. And the fact that West Ham stayed up, and to David Moyes' credit, West Ham only lost once in the last 7 games of the season, which is, to be fair, a pretty good takeaway considering the fixtures that West Ham had. But going forwards, this is the question I'll actually put to you. If Declan Rice leaves the club this summer, will West Ham be in the Premier League in 2022?
I think so.
Yeah, 100%. I think they've got too much quality to go down. I know Rice is integral to how West Ham plays, but I think they have got too much quality, and I think they will invest. Well, I'm hoping they will anyway, for your sake. They do need to sort of ship out some of the players that they've bought that haven't been as good as sort of the expectations they came with, and sort of rearrange their style of football and bring in players that are going to be utilised. I think sort of the players that David Moyes will go after, should he stay as the sort of the club's manager for the next full season. I'm not sure whether it's going to be the entertaining football that West Ham fans are after, but I think it will keep them in the division.
Callum, what's wrong with West Ham?
Well, I mean, the main point is the board, I guess. The board do not help anyone at the club. They like to chop and change manager. They don't back their managers properly. The fans dislike the manager, so it just creates a horrible atmosphere at the club. So that's obviously the one main thing. But West Ham is just a really, really strange club. You've got so many players on your books that are actually far better than a 16th place finish in the Premier League, but they just don't gel together. And it's just super strange. Like, you signed Haller this season and never really got the best out of him. And then you started to kind of get the best out of him when you was playing him up front in a 2 with Antonio, and then switched back to a 1 up front. So it seems there seems to be a complete inconsistency with the tactics. So I think David Moyes in the final few games of the season actually started to find a tactic for him that works with West Ham. I actually think the 2 signings he made during January are actually really good. So if he can continue finding players like that, like Jarrod Bowen, like Thomas Souček, especially if Declan Rice leaves as well, because you're going to have the money, I think you'll be fine. And to be honest, you could easily pick out some of the players that went down in Bournemouth or Watford's team. Say you got, I don't know how much you want for Declan Rice, but say you got around 50 million. There's no reason you can't go out to Watford and try and buy Decore off them as a like-for-like replacement. So it'll be interesting to see what you do in the transfer window.
What I would say about West Ham is, and it's something that's happened so many times over the years, is the club is so disjointed from top to bottom, in the sense that we buy these players and managers don't really seem to know what to do with them. The prime example, and this is slightly niche and not kind of that important, but I think it speaks to the heart of the way that West Ham is run, is Said Haksabanovic, who joined West Ham a couple of years ago on a free transfer from Man City, I think, only joined the club because his agent kind of leveraged the board into bringing him in at the same time as Marko Arnautovic. And he turned up to the training ground on the first day that he'd been signed by the club, and I think it would have been Slavan Bilic at the time who was still manager. And he turned up to the training ground, and Slavan Bilic didn't know who he was. He had no knowledge of the fact the guy was being signed. And there he was, kind of at the club in the training kit, ready to kind of take part in pre-season. And of course, it's a minor thing because it was basically a punt on a youth player. But that's not how you run a football club that's ever going to be successful. And again, you look at the players that West Ham brought in. Sebastian Haller was so successful for Eintracht Frankfurt last season, playing up front as a 2, and then we bring him in and put him up front on his own and don't put any crosses into the box. And it's happened so many times where West Ham have these pieces that you just need to utilise correctly, and it doesn't work. And yeah, and again, the other example of that is when West Ham had Javier Hernandez. The number of times would kick the ball long and hope that 5'6" Hernandez was going to win the ball in the air against 2 centre-halves, which is frankly ridiculous. And again, I think David Moyes, as long as he does something sensible, West Ham should be okay. And that's the thing. And I think what you said, Callum, about kind of the team that he stumbled on at the end of the season, where we had the back 4 of kind of Ben Johnson, Cresswell, Ogbonna, Diop at the back. That's a good defence. You had the 2 in midfield of Thomas Souček and Declan Rice. In front of that, you had Jarrod Bowen on the right, either Pablo Fornals or Mark Noble as the number 10, which I never thought I'd be saying. On the left...
You shake your head at that, but have you seen his numbers? His numbers as a number 10 were outrageously good. He was producing more chances than Bruno Fernandes. And I mean, Bruno Fernandes has been heralded. So maybe this is the new Alessandro Del Piero.
It's interesting having Mark Noble in the number 10. And I think the first time that it happened, I was watching the game on my phone, so I could like easily take screenshots. And I posted it on Twitter, and I was like, Mark Noble was actually playing at number 10. And again, I won't kind of slander Noble's good name because he's a legend, and I really appreciate everything he's done for the club. Mark Noble, in the way that Michail Antonio isn't a right back, Mark Noble is not a number 10. It's just ridiculous. He doesn't have the legs for it. And again, it's not like... And again, to be fair to him, he had very, very good numbers in that number 10 role. But the only reason he was picked to play there was because West Ham had this kind of obsession that he needed to be on the pitch to bring the quote-unquote passion. And the only reason he was in number 10 and not kind of as a number 6 or more of a deep line playmaker was simply because he didn't have the legs to run. So we put him in the position where he didn't have to move. We just thought, oh, what should we do? We'll play Mark Noble as Nengonch. It's just ridiculous. So yeah, going forwards. And again, we laugh because we had Manuel Lanzini, who, had he not been injured before the World Cup, was specifically chosen to be on the Argentina squad at the behest of Lionel Messi. Lanzini is a great footballer, and again, he's had his injury issues and he's not kind of high in confidence at the moment. But we chose Mark Noble over Manuel Lanzini to play as the side's prime creative hook at the heart of the attacking midfield. And I just think that's ludicrous. On a positive note, and I appreciate everyone's laughing at me at this point, big up Michail Antonio, because what a fantastic end to the season that guy had. And what I found exceptionally funny, and again, this is going to be the final part of my kind of West Ham rant that I've got going on here, is you'll remember, I think it was in the penultimate game of the season, West Ham got a penalty against Man U. And everyone expected Mark Noble to take it because Mark Noble is ranked as the third best penalty taker of this century. Since 2000, he's the third best penalty taker behind Robert Lewandowski and one other. He's fantastic at penalties.
I'm telling you, look, this guy, he's up there as one of the best players in the world.
Honestly, he's great. Mark Noble is fantastic. The point is, though, what I was getting to, at the time of the penalty, Michail Antonio had scored 9 goals for the club this season. Unfortunately for Mr. Gold, Mr. Sullivan and Baroness Brady, is they'd negotiated a clause into Michail Antonio's contract where he'd get a goal bonus if he scored 10 goals this year. So Mark Noble let him have the penalty and he scored. So I can only imagine the reaction from kind of the West Ham board after that one. But yeah, it's been an interesting season for West Ham, and looking forwards, kind of, and again, this wouldn't have kind of cut into the mainstream, but there was lots of conversation among West Ham fans about how shambolically the club proposed to do season tickets next year. They wanted everyone to pay the full price and then to refund them if you didn't get tickets, which makes absolutely no sense, but there you go. So yeah, my final comment on West Ham is quite simply, I would be more surprised if we're not in a similar situation next year than if we are kind of in mid-table where we belong.
Sorry, I know you just said that is your final point, but someone who's been really impressive this season in the Championship is Grady Diangana, who I think both of us were really impressed when he first came onto the scene. We've seen him a couple of times live, and he looked a really impressive player. Also, obviously, you're linked with Abire Eze from QPR. Would you sell Diangana and buy Eze, or would you keep both, or would you just keep Diangana and not buy Eze and rather spend the money elsewhere?
My understanding and kind of the noise coming out of the club is that they want Diangana to stay and they want to buy Eze as well. The issue you have, though, is Diangana would obviously play on the wing, which would mean Eze would come inside as the number 10. And then it's kind of very much up in the air what you would do with the other players, because you have Yarmolenko, who's obviously a winger, who is exceptionally slow. You've got Fornals, who David Moyes is obsessed with playing out wide, who is also exceptionally slow. You've got Felipe Anderson, who is just abysmal. So, yeah, I'd quite like to see both at the club. And I think Grady Diangana is a really, really good player, and he's had a great year kind of in the Championship with West Brom. My only concern with Diangana is when the season finished, the Championship season finished, and he'd kind of earned promotion with West Brom, is kind of the comments that he was putting out on social media very much made it look like he was hoping to stay. And I just think David Moyes needs to prove very early on that Dejan Garner is actually going to be a big part of his team, because if he's not, if you're given the choice between sitting on the bench for David Moyes or being a starter for Slavan Bilic, I think I'd know what I'd want to do if I was a young winger. So yeah, that's my slight concern. But as I say, I'd take either or both, preferably both.
Yeah.
No, I'd agree.
Yeah, I think Eze's actually really good. I think he's had an amazing season at QPR. He's just, seriously impressive. Then we look at other teams. Obviously, we're speaking about Bournemouth, Watford and Norwich all going down. Something that I think is really interesting is that all these teams have really good quality players in various different positions. Is there anybody in them three teams that you want your club to kind of go in for? Because I know from a Liverpool perspective, I really want Jamal Lewis. And I actually wouldn't mind getting Lloyd Kelly either from Bournemouth. I think they're both really good options and they're positions we both need. So I think players like that will be really cool for Liverpool to pick up. But I just wanted to know from like your team's perspectives if there was anybody kicking about.
For me, I would have gone with Nathan Ake, but as we've seen today, that's sort of not going to happen now, as he seems to have an agreement with Man City. The others, I feel like they've got good quality players, but I'm not sure whether they would fit in with the way Arsenal play, given that the players we already have. I mean, I know there's a lot of talent there, but I do think we've sort of got that covered in the positions where they have a lot of good quality players.
From a West Ham perspective, and it's interesting because a lot of the players kind of attached to these clubs, especially Bournemouth and Watford, will go to teams better than West Ham. I'm thinking of the likes of Sarr and Decore. They'll probably go to teams like Tottenham, I'd imagine. So I feel like West Ham are kind of picking from the second rung of relegated players, if that makes sense. The slightly controversial comment I made in the group chat earlier was that, and again, it won't happen, but I would really love to see Troy Deeney at West Ham just because it would be so funny. He would, it would just be funny, basically. And it's the kind of signing that West Ham would make. And I think that's the reason it's so jarring to think about, is because West Ham would undoubtedly go and buy another slow attacker. Just to add to the ranks of Yarmolenko and Sebastian Haller, would go and buy another slow striker. So yeah, he's not the player that West Ham should sign. But I wouldn't be upset if it did happen. On a more kind of a serious note of players that I'd actually want West Ham to kind of go in for, I quite like Will Hughes, and I'm not sure how much of that is because of a 2014 Football Manager save I had. But I do like the idea of having Will Hughes because he's someone who, again, likes to sit at the base of the midfield. He said that he prefers to play kind of at the base of the midfield rather than as an attacking midfielder, much like the Mark Nobles of this world. So yeah, Will Hughes would make sense. But there's a number of really good players, and again, the likes of both Norwich fullbacks will go on to bigger and better things than teams in the bottom half of the Premier League. And what I'd be wary of as well is the teams that are being promoted, like West Brom and Leeds, for instance, are both looking like they will be, and Leeds especially, look like they'll be a team that will stay pretty far clear of a relegation battle. They just look a cut above what West Ham will be able to offer next year, and kind of Aston Villa as well. My concern for teams that finished low in the season this year is if the teams that were promoted from the Championship are better than the teams that were relegated from the Premier League, is you'll have a situation where the teams that only just stayed up are comparatively worse than the competition was this season. So West Ham and Villa, in particular, really desperately need to strengthen. And do you strengthen by buying the relegated players? I'm not so sure.
Yeah. The problem, as you kind of just said, is that a lot of the talent that is going down are linked with bigger clubs. And two of the ones that have really caught my eye, obviously, these are transfer rumours at the moment, but look as if they could be potential deals. Obviously, we have Nathan Ake being linked with Manchester City in a £41 million deal. Obviously, that could be intercepted by Chelsea, who have a first purchase clause in his contract from when he was there. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But also another one as well is Max Aarons being linked with Bayern Munich, which is the most bizarre transfer ever. It feels like you're playing FM in real life. And I like Max Aarons, but I mean, they don't need any more fullbacks at Bayern Munich, so that'd be a really strange one. But yeah, that's the problem with the kind of mid-table obscurity teams, is that a lot of these players are linked with the Liverpools, the Arsenals, the rest of the teams in the league like that. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of where them players end up. But obviously there is a lot of quality going down, but also kind of looking at it as well. Obviously once Bournemouth lose players and Norwich lose players, they're going to need to reinvest. And something I'm really hoping happens with Bournemouth is obviously Harry Wilson has been on loan this season, and I would happily take the 41 million off of their hands that they've just got for Nathan Ake if they can give it to Liverpool so we can sign some players. But it'll be interesting to see what them teams going down do in terms of transfer business too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult for them to sort of get anyone coming in, because I think they're going to lose so many players that anyone who does sign is going to be thrown into a comparatively worse team. Because you look at Bournemouth, they're already losing Ake, who is one of their best players, if not their best player. It's where do they then go on from there? Who's going to join them of that quality, I think, is where you've got to look at sort of the relegated team. I can't see them coming straight back up, just because they do hold so much quality that aren't really going to stay.
What I would say about Bournemouth as well, and this is kind of a different point, but it's still kind of relevant, is even though they're not as good as Watford, I don't think the squad is as good as Watford. I don't think at any point they've kind of been on the same level as Watford this season, although, of course, they finished on a similar number of points. What I would say with Bournemouth as well is the fact that since they were promoted, there's always been this fairy tale about the club, about how Eddie Howe has guided them from League Two, saved them from dropping out of the Football League altogether, and then has delivered them to become this kind of Premier League club who play nice football in a 4-4-2, and everyone in England loves a 4-4-2, so it must be great. The issue that you have with Bournemouth is, kind of, believe it or not, they're exceptionally well moneyed. They have kind of, I believe, a Russian billionaire who owns the club and has bankrolled them kind of through the divisions anyway. And I feel like if they are now, they are now relegated, they're going to lose a lot of their players. And I can just see a situation where the owner says, no, we're going to spend big in the Championship and we're going to try and win promotion straight away. And if Bournemouth do that, I hope that people kind of open their eyes to the fact that Bournemouth aren't this little club that can't compete financially. They've got the resources. They've just managed them abysmally. And again, Callum will know this best. The amount of money that Bournemouth has spent on Liverpool rejects, who have then not delivered anything in the slightest.
What are you talking about? Lanky nearly saved them from going down after not scoring for a whole season. He scored, 3 or 4? Brilliant signing.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's just Bournemouth and Eddie Howe have kind of recruited abysmally. One player, actually, to go back to our previous conversation, that I would love to see back at West Ham, as Bournemouth have been relegated, and partly in preparation for our 2022 Champions League run, is Junior Stanislas. Of course, he kind of came through at the club, would count as a homegrown player when we do qualify for Europe under David Moyes, and I just think is someone who I'd quite like to add to the mix. But yeah, Bournemouth next season could go one of two ways. They could either plumb it and then kind of see those resources drain away, or they could very much go down the route of, we're going to flex our financial muscles and we're going to get out of this league as soon as possible.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how them teams cope in the Championship next season. And talking of the Championship, obviously we're now firmly underway in the Championship playoffs. Obviously last night Brentford got to playoff final after beating Swansea at Griffin Park. And then tonight Fulham take a 2-0 lead into their game against Cardiff. Dan, we know that you obviously love Brentford. What did you make of their performance last night?
Last night, the Brentford performance was quality. They hardly put a foot wrong. I mean, it should have been a lot bigger margin that they were winning by, other than 3-0. I mean, we saw sort of the bizarre moment. I don't know if either of you watched it, from Pontus Jansson, which allowed Brewster to score. That was sort of when it got a bit nervy. As a person who loves the club, it's. But they're a side that's got such good quality, and I do hope if they do get promoted that they do stick together, because obviously there's a lot of clubs circling around Ben Rama, Ollie Watkins. If they lose them two players, it's going to be a massive loss for them. I can't see how they're going to sort of recruit anyone at the same quality, and they play so well together. it's sort of like the Liverpool front three. They just fit together, sort of. Watkins, Benrahma, and Mbeumo. They are perfectly in sync with each other. But the performance last night was incredible. I mean, obviously it was the last game at Griffin Park, so it's nice to sort of seal that with a 3-1 win in the playoff semi-final, given how they actually lost to Barnsley in the last game of the regular season there. So he gave the stadium a good send-off, and obviously there was a bit of confrontation with Thomas Frank in stoppage time as well, after he threw the ball away from, I can't remember the Swansea player, but that sort of got it a bit heated and added a bit more spice into the mix. But it was a good game from a Brentford point of view. But Swansea weren't bad either. I mean, the last sort of 25 minutes, especially after they scored, they were sort of coming out on top in a lot of the game after that. I could see them sort of nicking a goal towards the end. Thankfully, they didn't. But I'd love to see them progress through and up into the Premier League.
Yeah, it was a really interesting game last night because obviously Brentford got the early lead and kind of what they needed in that game. But as you kind of just said, Pontus Jansson, I don't know what he was doing for Brewster's goal. It's comical defending, and I might be wrong, but he is their captain, correct?
He is, yes, yeah, he is.
So for your captain to be doing that in probably your biggest game this season was just bizarre. But talking about Ryan Brewster, obviously is someone I've kept an eye on since he's got out on loan at Swansea, and he's got 11 goals in 22 games. And I don't think it'd be far off to say he kind of single-handedly dragged Swansea into the playoffs. Since he's been there, they've been a much better team from what I know. And I think a lot of Swansea fans were actually really excited by him as well as Liverpool fans. And I said this in a group chat earlier, and I don't know if it's really far-fetched or not, but obviously there's a lot of teams sniffing around Ryan Brewster next season. And personally, I would actually quite like to keep him at Liverpool. I think he's probably actually a better option off the bench than Divock Origi, but I feel like he will go out on loan to a Premier League club. Do you think Ryan Brewster would fit in at Brentford, especially if Ollie Watkins does leave, or do you reckon we would see him somewhere else?
The thing is with Brewster, I mean, he's obviously a quality player. We can all agree on that. It's just, I think you have to see it in motion with Brentford as to whether anyone is going to fit into their style of play. He did look like a good player. I mean, last night he had a quiet first half. I mean, I think that was mainly to do with Swansea's performance and not his sort of individual performance. But there was a graphic last night, and he dropped into sort of Swansea's own half to pick up the ball more than he actually picked it up in sort of the final third, which says a lot. I mean, that's not really sort of how Brentford do play their game. They're sort of dropping back. But I do think, should Ollie Watkins leave, Ryan Brewster definitely isn't a bad option to replace him with, especially on loan. It's sort of it would be a no-brainer for them. I mean, it would be a small fee to keep him there. So if he was to leave, I think that would be a good test to see whether Brewster can live up to the hype, especially if they do make it into the Premier League.
Yeah, I think Brewster's a really interesting player. Obviously, a lot of the time he's compared to Greenwood, which, I mean, they're both exceptional players, so it's kind of unfair to judge them against each other. But another player that's really obviously impressed this season for Brentford is Benrahma. I mean, he's been the standout player in the Championship. Once again, has been linked with some big moves away from the team. Is it really now key that Brentford get up to the Premier League in order to keep hold of him, do you reckon, Luke?
I would say so. And kind of on a broader point, what I find quite interesting about Brentford is the model they have with regards to youth development. They don't really have their own academy. There was a really interesting article in The Athletic where what Brentford basically do is sign players once they've been released by a kind of Category 1 or Category A, whatever the terminology is, academies from kind of the top flight, the likes of Arsenal, kind of Manchester United, so on and so forth. Bring them into the club at kind of the age of a development squad player, and then kind of work that way. So then you're kind of going about building your own team in a different way. And I think what would be interesting to see if they are promoted is whether or not they keep that system. In terms of the players currently at the club, it's always tricky because if they are promoted, there's the temptation to say, come on, stay with the team, let's see what we can do together in the Premier League. We'll kind of have another go at it. But of course, it's a huge reputational risk for players that do stay, and then if they are promoted and then they foul, because kind of, again, there's loads of players in Brentford's team who have done exceptionally well this season. If they leave Brentford at the end of the season and go, and again, kind of the guy is linked with Chelsea at the moment, if he does go to Chelsea and he does well at Chelsea, then it's great and it's kind of good for his reputation and his stock rises. If you spend a season in the Premier League with a team that might not do so well, especially if you're an attacking player and your numbers start to dip, then it's a question of kind of what's good for your career. And again, if Brentford aren't promoted, they'll lose their players. If they are promoted, they could still potentially lose some players, but the club is run in such a manner that I think they'll be able to bring in people at the right price who could potentially kind of boost them next season anyway. And again, you kind of look to some of the more less travelled kind of leagues in Europe, the likes of Denmark, so on and so forth, and they've been compared on a number of occasions with SC Midtjylland as well with regards to the recruitment strategy. And I just think Brentford are a very, very technically savvy club. So even if they do lose their players, I think they'll probably be okay.
Oh, go on.
I think it's going to be essential for them to pick up the right players. And like you say, the way that they work is very interesting. I mean, you see just an example of sort of their recruitment. You see them bring in Josh Da Silva from Arsenal. I think it was last year. And he's sort of settled into that side. He doesn't start every game, but he's a player that when he's in the side, they do look good still. As a rotational player, he still fits their model. And I think this is where Brentford have got to go. They've got to look at players that are going to fit in rather than go into the big name signings, which is something they rarely do. I mean, obviously, Ollie Watkins was highly regarded after his season at Exeter when he joined them. But they're not a team to go out and buy big name players. I mean, you look at, they bought Matthias Jensen, who just come off of sort of a bad season elsewhere. I think he was at Celta Vigo in Spain. And he was sort of regarded as not being worth the hype that he was sort of was brought along with him at such a young age. I mean, I'm looking at it now. He made sort of 6 appearances at Celta Vigo last year, which is sort of that's pretty awful for a youth. He's 24 now, for a player who came so highly regarded. But he's really turned it around at Brentford, and I think they get the perfect players. And I don't know how they manage to do it, but it just fits their system.
Yeah, as you say, I think it is important if Brentford do go up that they don't follow the model of such as like Fulham or Aston Villa did. And I actually think where Brentford I don't think they've ever played Premier League football. It could actually work in their benefit that they're not one of the big clubs in the league, so they can't attract that talent, because sometimes it actually works in your detriment. So I think if Brentford go up and make some good signings or keep kind of that spine of that team, I think they'll actually have a really good season. But obviously, to kind of look at if they will go up, we need to obviously look at the second tie in the playoffs. Obviously, Cardiff lost 2-0 to Fulham. I mean, there was a brilliant goal scored by a former Tottenham player, Josh Onomah, superb solo strike. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you go watch it. And then in the 91st minute as well, Gabano scored to basically wrap up that leg. And to be honest, I think it will be wrapping up that tie. Obviously, we gave our predictions last week on who we think will get promoted via the playoffs. And my tip was Fulham. I think they've got some really good players. Obviously, they've got Mitrovic, who finished as the Championship's top scorer, and they have Tom Cairney, who was also been up to the Premier League and actually scored the winning goal in the playoff last time. But out of them two teams, do you reckon Fulham are the biggest threat to Brentford's chances of getting back to the Premier League, getting up to the Premier League? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously there's sort of that added rivalry given as it's sort of the West London derby alongside obviously QPR. So I think that'd be a very interesting game to sort of see Brentford versus Fulham in a playoff final. I think that would be an incredible game, sort of both sets of supporters and just fans of football itself. I think that both teams have such good quality. I mean, I know Fulham, they didn't perform sort of as well as I think a lot of people expected at the start of the season. I think they were tipped for sort of automatic promotion or to be there and thereabouts. But they're a good side. But I do think that Brentford have a better team. I do think they have better rotational players, as we've seen sort of with Emiliano, who's come in and he hadn't scored. He scored like a couple of goals in 30 odd games before this, and he's now had like 8 goal contributions in 4 games. He's a player that he's transformed since the restart and has been incredible for them. And I think they show they've got such good pieces in the rotation that they can afford to have. They can afford to keep up with Fulham. I mean, you talk about sort of Tom Kearney, who's been up to the Premier League and experienced it, which I'm surprised he didn't leave sort of after Fulham went back down. But they're good players, but I think Brentford have got the better side compared to Fulham.
I agree. Yeah. I personally think Brentford will probably do it. And again, I said it last week. I said if West Brom secure the second automatic spot, I would kind of fancy Brentford regardless, because they're on such an emotional high, having kind of finished on a positive note at Griffin Park, and it would be such a scalp for a club that hasn't been in the Premier League as it's currently constituted to then have their first season in a new stadium in the top division of English football, being promoted with 2 very, very big clubs alongside Leeds United and West Bromwich Albion. So yeah, I feel like this could be last chance for Brentford, because if they don't go up this year, they'll recruit again smartly, but it will take them a number of years to build up the team that's going to kind of challenge at the top end of the Championship again, kind of in contention for second, third, first position. So yeah, I think it's really important for Brentford that they go again and are able to win the playoff final. I think Fulham, regardless of the result, they've had quite a positive season. Scott Parker is growing into the role as the team's manager. They've got a number of good players. I personally don't particularly like Mitrovic simply because he's too much of a loose cannon. He got suspended, didn't he, at the end of the season as well. So it's just a case of kind of how much faith can Fulham put in this guy. I think he's been relegated, of course, as a Fulham player. So yeah, it's interesting. I think it will be a really good playoff final. And again, the playoff final is this evening at the time of recording, but it seems very, very likely that Fulham will be the team that Brentford face. And I just think playoff finals are always very exciting for the neutral. They're, speaking from experience, they are the worst game in the world to watch if you're kind of involved on a partisan level. But yeah, I think it'll be a really good advert for the Championship, because these are 2 teams that play pretty good football, have pretty good players, and they've both got relatively young managers who are hoping to make their mark in the game. So I think whatever comes of the final, it'll be something to look forward to.
Yeah. Speaking about Scott Parker and Thomas Frank, obviously I know you have a soft spot for Scott Parker from his days at West Ham, but we also like Thomas Frank, and we think he's done well. If given Brentford or Fulham get promoted to the Premier League, who do you reckon would fare better in the Premier League? Do you reckon Scott Parker or Thomas Frank?
I would personally say Thomas Frank, just because he kind of he has more experience, doesn't he? Scott Parker's still obviously new to management, so I just feel like Scott Parker. The thing is as well, Scott Parker has massively grown into the role, because when Fulham were relegated, he took over at the end of the season, didn't he? And he had a pretty decent run, but he didn't have enough time to keep them in the division. They're already too far behind. And you look at a number of, and again, there was a tweet I saw the other day about kind of Chelsea players that were in the Chelsea team in 2004 when they won the Premier League. You had Frank Lampard, who's now at obviously manager of Chelsea. Ricardo Carvalho is now assistant manager somewhere on the continent. John Terry is, of course, at Aston Villa, and Scott Parker's doing his thing with Fulham. And again, I think Scott Parker's someone who will have a very, very good career. And again, this is an anecdote that people talk about too much. But there's the example of a game where West Ham were losing, I think it was 2-0 at half-time, under Avram Grant. Scott Parker took the players into the changing room, kind of ripped them to shreds, and this was still when he was like in his mid-20s. And West Ham came out and won in the second half. So yeah, I think he's someone with a really bright future. I think for now, it would be better for Brentford to go up. I think Scott Parker could probably do with another year. And again, they could be really well positioned next season, Fulham, because if you look at the teams that have been relegated, there's lots of question marks. Norwich, we have no idea which players they'll be able to keep hold of. That could be quite problematic. Watford, how many managers will they sack? Bournemouth, are they just going to spend too much money on a number of Liverpool players? So yeah, I think Fulham next season have a really good opportunity if they aren't promoted, in a way that probably Brentford don't have that shot.
Danny, you in agreement?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think Thomas Frank, obviously he was assistant manager at Brentford before. He knows the club. He knows sort of what they're about. I think he'll love to sort of push them on a bit more. And I think he's got that arrogance about him, which is needed in the Premier League. I mean, you look at sort of Jose Mourinho and how he's sort of got this reputation for himself. I do feel like Thomas Frank will have the same sort of aura about him, just like as we've seen over the past couple of days, the arrogance that he has and the real belief that he has in his side. I think he'll be the better manager in the Premier League.
I think that just about wraps up our segment on the playoffs. And of course, another league that is renowned for its playoff system is Major League Soccer. We're going to hop back across the pond to talk about that briefly. And of course, currently in MLS, we've got the MLS's back to one. It's down into the quarterfinal. And there's been a number of really, really exciting developments in the tournament. You've seen, obviously, Frank de Boer has been dismissed as Atlanta United manager, which I think was a really, really smart decision on their part because he just didn't kind of fit the club. Orlando City, for the first time in their existence, are looking like a team that can actually play good football, which is quite the surprise. And Toronto FC crashed out of the tournament after being one of the better teams by losing to New York City FC, who were quite comfortably one of the worst teams in the group stage. However, there was one thing that I wanted to mention, just to kind of feather the cap of MLS briefly. It has nothing kind of currently to do with MLS, but Zlatan Ibrahimovic, of course, spent a couple of years at the LA Galaxy, had this pretty major injury kind of earlier this year. He's now in Syria with AC Milan, and of course, people have kind of said that MLS is this retirement league. Players only go there to get their final payday. Ibrahimovic has gone back to a major league on the European continent and has scored 9 goals in half a season. I just wanted to say that once and for all proves that MLS is better than Syria.
I mean, that is a ropey comment. I mean, Zlatan is just, I think, a different breed to any other footballer we've ever probably seen. I mean, the guy genuinely looks like he could go on into his 40s. So, I don't know. I think Zlatan just does what he wants, doesn't he? He doesn't really care but to be fair, I do think the MLS has got far better than it was. And I think some of the stick it gets sometimes is massively undeserved. And it's from people really that don't watch the league. But I think, especially with the new teams coming through into the league, I think the MLS has a lot of potential. So, yeah, I definitely think the criticism it gets is actually quite far-fetched.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure on the Serie A comment, but they are getting better. And you can see that as they've been able to attract players that aren't sort of in their retirement phase, as well as young players who have a lot of potential. I mean, such as Christian Pavon, who was sort of linked to a move in Europe and then ended up at the Galaxy as well. I think you've only got to look at sort of a few examples, and if they can sort of continue this recruitment as they have done in the last few years, I think they can sort of make a name for themselves. I do think it'll be hard just because of the sort of stigma attached to American soccer, as they call it. But I think they will eventually sort of bring themselves up to being a big league.
For sure. What has been interesting about MLS's back is the fact that you've had a number of teams that have really kind of burst onto the scene. And what I will say is kind of my final rogue suggestion of the podcast, and I've had quite a few, is, and this is something I'm going to try to speak into existence, is Matias Almeida, the manager of the San Jose Earthquakes, is my pick for the next vacant job in the Premier League, regardless of what team it is, simply because I want to see the chaos of his man marking system in Europe, and I think it would just be spectacularly entertaining. This is a manager who played under Marcelo Bielsa while he was still in his playing career, has transformed the San Jose Earthquakes, for people not kind of in the loop, are probably the Norwich of MLS for a number of years. They were pretty abysmal. They were really, really bad. They don't spend any money, but they just happen to have the highest goal scorer in league history in Chris Wondolowski. And Almeida came in and transformed them from this team that played horrific football, really, really nasty football, into a team that played slick passing, kind of attacking possession play, and just pressed in an insane manner really, really high up the pitch. So yeah, if you haven't heard of Matias Almeida, do some reading, because he is tactically one of the most, in my opinion, interesting managers on the planet. And I'm not even saying that just to be controversial, unlike the Syria comment that I might have made a few moments ago. Before we wrap up the show, any final comments from you, Dan?
For me, just looking forward to Saturday and seeing Arsenal lift the FA Cup for the 14th time over Frank Lampard's Chelsea. I think we'd all love to see that. And
Callum, any final thoughts from you?
Firstly, I'm just going to say, Dan, I wouldn't get your hopes up. I'm kind of expecting a Giroud back host header in the final.
I'm expecting the same, but I'm trying to speak it into existence.
Manifest.
We can hope.
But yeah, I think it'll be quite a nice place to finish off. Obviously, today, in 1996 was the time England won the World Cup. So obviously, we lost Jack Charlton, one of the 1966 heroes. So just a shout out to all them guys who have probably given us our best moment in English football history, and it's probably going to be for quite some time.
And that, of course, brings the Pre-Match Pint to a close for another week. Of course, you can now find us on Twitter at Pre-Match Pint Pod. We're trying to kind of promote that as much as possible. But until next time, keep your head high, beat the offside trap, stay safe, and we'll see you later.